everyone, and welcome to another episode of Code and the Coding Coders Who Code It. I'm your host, Drew Bragg, and today I'm joined by Jeremy Smith. Jeremy, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, everybody. I am a designer developer working in Rails, and I run a tiny one-person web studio called Hybrid. I'm using Rails almost exclusively since 2009. And I do long-term fractional contracts with small organizations and solo founders, partnering with them to build and maintain their Rails applications.
Awesome. Before we dive in, for those of you who are new to the show, I'm going to ask Jeremy a couple of questions. I'm going to ask him what he's currently working on, if he has any blockers, or if he doesn't have a current blocker, what was he recently blocked by and how did he solve it? And then at the end, I'm going to ask him to share something cool, new, or interesting that he's recently learned, discovered, worked with, or did. And it doesn't even have to be coding related. But before we get into all that, how much fun did you have at RubyConf Mini?
Oh man, I had a lot of fun. So RubyConf Mini was my fourth conference this year after many years of not going to any conferences for clear reasons in the past couple of years. But even before that, I wasn't going very much. I think I'd only been to Southeast Ruby, Jason Charn's event 3 times. And this year I decided I was going to go all out. So I went to 4 and RubyConf Mini was my last. It was a blast. And I was really excited to be able to speak there for the first time. That was nerve-wracking, but also very exciting, and met a lot of great people. And it was just a nice close to kind of the conference year for me.
It was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed your talk. It was very well put together, and you did an amazing job. I couldn't tell that it was your first time speaking. You were just calm, had a lot of great content. It came out really well. I can't wait for the video to come out, just because every time I watch a conference talk live, I'm like, that was awesome, but I don't remember why.
Yeah.
And I need the video to go back and actually digest everything. 2 to 4 times, you got to hear something, right? Inside RubyConf Mini joke, folks. You'll get it when the videos come out. Sorry. Carrying on with the episode as it's intended, what are you working on?
Several things. So I mentioned that I do these fractional retainer contracts. What that looks like right now for me is I have 3 different clients, all of them about 10 hours a week. And when you do, well, at least my experience consulting, 30 hours build is basically a full work week. So if you can build 3/4 of a day, you can work about 6 hours in an 8-hour day. That's build time. I'll say that. So that's a full schedule. Like a couple months ago, I was doing 40, and that meant working nights and weekends when I was doing 4 clients. So right now I've got one client that it's an app for homeschool families to create transcripts for their high schoolers, which is kind of a challenging thing for homeschoolers. They have to create transcripts to send to colleges, and that can be a nerve-wracking thing, calculating GPA and stuff like that. So the original guy that built it, he's a Rails dev, senior Rails dev. He's moved into more of a overseeing role, and I'm taking on a lot of the heavy lifting now on the development side. So I've been building a new visual template builder there. That's been my big feature for the year. Because I'm only doing 10 hours a week, it takes a long time to get features built, but that's what we can do. For another project, it's related to SEO and content strategy. It's a tool for doing keyword measurement and calculations. And it's basically generating a lot of these reports. And I do a lot of background job work and backend Rails work for this client. And that's been a really interesting project. It's the first time I've worked with an application that was so background job heavy. The front end of the app is much thinner. It's a very basic CRUD app, but on the back side of it, there are all these really complex workflows. I don't know if you've seen in the Sidekick wiki, the really complex workflow page.
Yeah.
Okay. This one is really complex workflows.
No.
At least for me, what Mike has on that page, I'm like, no, this is not really complex. So that's been a challenge. I've been learning a lot of stuff there. And then the last project is I started over the summer. It's a Rails upgrade. So they had a Rails app running Ruby 1.9.3, Rails 4.0, and running on an old VPS. And they wanted to migrate to Heroku and get everything upgraded all up to present. So I'm currently at Ruby 2.4, Rails 5, maybe 1, and we're on Heroku. I think that's where I'm at right now on that.
Nice.
A lot of context switching, I'm moving around a lot. The work is very different. I'm working in front-end oriented code right now with this visual template thing. I'm doing a lot of like turbo and stimulus work. I'm doing a lot of sidekick and background job work with this other app. Then upgrades, which I've done a ton of over the years, but it's all very different and a lot of context switching, which is one of the perennial blockers for me. It's just all this context switching every week. And I mean, I do it to myself because I set my work up this way, but there's a reason for that. Years ago, I got into freelancing, maybe in like my 20s. I'm in my 40s now. In my 20s, I did a stint of freelancing where I'd find a client, build a site or app for them. And it would take me so long to figure out the client and to understand like how to communicate with them, what they want, then come up with an estimate of how long it's going to take, then build it and overshoot that estimate, quickly get it done, and then like wipe my brow and then go find another one. And that cadence of just like constant stress was just like way too much for me. And while I wanted to be able to work for myself, that was just a really stressful way to do it. For me, I'm kind of risk averse and I don't like a lot of stress. And that was high risk, high stress. So when I kind of stumbled into fractional contracting, what I realized was it was fairly low stress and fairly low risk, because if I lose any client right now, it would be a third of my week. So you just have to like fill that part of the pipeline. And because they're ongoing relationships, once I get to know a client in the first 3 or 4 months, we have a good working relationship. I know as soon as I see them on a Zoom call, how they're feeling just by their facial expression. All that kind of stuff really adds up. I feel like it takes me 9 months to a year to really feel like I understand an app and a business domain and a product, the market and the product itself, what the product should be. And that's when I feel like I can start bringing my best value. It's at that point. If I was building greenfield apps or something like that, where I had to knock them out in 3 or 4 months or something like that, I feel like I would probably be just understanding the business and the product at the end of the project. So right. For me, this is much lower stress. I get to keep these long-term relationships. It's lower risk, and I don't have to go through a lot of sales or marketing cycles that way.
Yeah.
But the downside is there's a lot of context switching. One of the big ways I've solved that in like the past 6 months or so has been taking documentation to another level. I'm pretty good at being verbose in my PRs, but I've gone even further into documenting in my own like note-taking app just every day, basically keeping almost like a programming journal. And I heard about other people that did that, and it just seemed like, man, that would take so much time. But the thing is, I'm saving so much time because so many of the things that I do, I have to repeat them. If I get halfway done on something and then I can't touch it for 3 or 4 days, I'm going to be totally lost when I get back to it. So this gives me a way to document all those things so that when I get back to it, I can spin up faster. I can bring myself back to the context I'm in. And I think part of the challenge there was realizing a couple things that were happening that I wasn't aware of. Like one was recognizing like when I'm in research mode, like, oh, I'm in research mode now. I have 15 tabs open. I better keep all of these URLs somewhere because I'm going to need them, in 3 days. Or like pulling out the best snippets from those. Or another case would be like, I'm building a list of the ways to reproduce something. Like you're writing command line commands, you're just kind of typing things in and going step by step. You get blocked on something, you go fix something, you type something else in. And then you do that for like 30 minutes and you forgot all the 10 steps that you did. So now I'm really like getting into the context of, oh, I'm building a task list or I'm building a way to reproduce something. It was happening to me today, like when I was trying to test webhook payloads. Okay, here's how to set this up to test the webhook payloads are coming in correctly. That can be copy and pasted to whoever needs to review my PR for how they're going to test the new webhook approach that I'm building or something like that. So recognizing when you're in those states and then just saving everything, just copy and pasting all that stuff. Then you can come back to it. But that's really helpful. And I'm going back often to like, okay, where was I that day? Okay, let me look for my notes from that day. Or sometimes it's for, using search. But in both ways, that's really helped with the context switching.
And something you said almost at the beginning of that, where you were talking about it takes you close to like 9 months to a year to really, truly have a grasp of an application and the business domain and what the goal of the application is. And I think that's actually a really important one to highlight, because I know I fell into this trap when I was more junior dev, and I hear it from a lot of more junior devs now where they're like, I just don't understand everything. It's like, well, you don't have to. Number one, no one understands everything. Even the people who wrote it, I don't necessarily remember everything of every system I wrote, even 6 months ago. You can take your time really getting a handle on everything, and you don't have to learn everything all at once. Thanks for bringing that up, because it's a good reminder. And for anyone out there who's listening and is on the more junior side and is like, I just don't understand everything, that's cool. You don't have to. I did want to ask, though, the freelancing to fractional contracts definitely sounds awesome. I can at least wrap my head around how to go about getting a freelance client. There's websites to help you do it. You might just stumble upon someone, maybe cold call, cold email. How do you end up getting those fractional contracts where you develop a good relationship and you've got a long running? Because you've got 3 very different almost offerings. Here's the skill set I can use. And you're using 3 very different versions of programming skills for 3 very different products, not even in like, oh, I do a lot of healthcare work or I do a lot of any one particular industry. So how do you get those clients?
I've been trying to figure out if there's a way to generalize what I've done or if it's really particular to me. Sometimes when you kind of poke your head up and look around to see if anybody's doing things the way you do them, it can mean either one, you've stumbled onto something that's unique and interesting that other people should be aware of. The other answer, though, is that there might be reasons why no one does things the way you do them. Like, it may be just a dumb way to do stuff.
Sure.
And I kind of vacillate between those two. Like, I'm never quite sure. There are some days I'm like, this is so cool. Everybody should be doing this. And then there are other times it's like, okay, there's obvious reasons why people don't do this. This is dumb. It can be challenging to find the contracts, but one of the things that's great about it, and one of the things I keep telling myself is I don't need that many. I don't need an endless supply. The pipeline is, if I'm doing these long-term retainers, the oldest one I have right now, I'm probably coming up on, I want to say 2 years or something like that. It's just not that hard if I've got to add 1 a year or even 2 a year. So how many leads do I need to convert in that time? It's a math problem, right? You've got to have a certain number of leads come in, and then you've got to have a certain number convert. And then if they're the kind of lead that's going to turn into a client that's a long-term retainer, then your lifetime value on that could be a year, 2 years, 3 years, or even longer. So the way I started really was with my last full-time position, turning that into my first contract and then going to get another one. My biggest advice is if someone was going to do this coming from full-time employment, find a way to position yourself in your company so you can keep them as your first client, but don't go out on your own until you've got another one in the bag. In my experience, a lot of times managers and companies would rather keep you. I don't think I've ever had a place where they wanted me to leave. It was me ready to leave. They almost always want to keep developers. That's at least been my experience. Once you learn a company and a product, a team, a way of working, all this kind of stuff, and all of the institutional knowledge that you gain as a developer, once you become relied on that way, there's a lot to your advantage in terms of the ways you can negotiate with a company. So I negotiated into a part-time contract role with my last full-time employer. And then I had another client that I knew I could grab and pull in as another long-term retainer. And that just got me started. In the last year or so, I've been trying to push myself harder on that, trying to take more risks. Now that I've been doing this for several years, I feel much more confident, both in my development skills, but also in my ability to find work. The strategies that started to work for me are some blogging, but it hasn't been that much. Last year, I had this goal of I wanted to make it into Ruby Weekly. It had always been like a dream of mine. I wrote some blog posts in the fall, and within the first couple, I got in. I was super excited. I was like shocked, but very excited to finally get into Ruby Weekly. And then I got some leads for work out of that. It wasn't just posting on my site. It was really getting into Ruby Weekly. It led to a high number of page views that led to some inbound leads. That also led to like an offering to be on like another podcast. And then I think I got another lead out of that. I need to start tracking my leads a little bit better and treat myself a little bit more like a business. I haven't done that well in the past. I've started to do that like in the past month. But out of that, I've gotten enough work. Okay, that and Twitter. So that's the other thing.
Okay.
In the past year, I started to get serious about Twitter, trying to figure out how to use it as a way to be involved in the community, but also as a way to generate leads. And I don't know about you, but like for a long time, I was like, do I bring my whole self to Twitter? Like, do I bring all my hobbies and my other interests, or do I just focus it on this one thing? And I finally decided, yeah, I'm going to like focus just on like Ruby and Rails. That's the stuff that I'm going to talk about on Twitter. And focusing that way was really helpful. There's plenty to talk about because it's what I'm doing all the time. And it gave me a way to focus. And then I started to be able to have more interesting conversations with people. That also led to some inbound leads. So the combination of blogging in a way that gets you visibility and then using Twitter in a way that gets you visibility or connection to people that will be interested in your services. I have not found job boards to be very helpful at all. It's very rare, and I pay close attention to them because I'm always trying to understand the Ruby and Rails market. So I'm checking job boards on a weekly basis, even though I haven't had a full-time job since like 2013. But I watch it because I want to understand the market. I want to understand who's hiring, what agencies are hiring, what companies use Rails, and who out of those are the people that will sometimes offer like a contract role or a part-time role or things like that. But they're very infrequent and hard to kind of nail down what the profile is. But there are a few categories that I recommend people to look for. Early stage projects. So this would be like early startups, side hustles, prototypes. Other categories would be small indie products. That's like the transcript builder that I was talking about. Internal or ancillary apps. I had a long-term contract for a technical company where I built and managed their Rails CMS/customer portal. And that was all done in Rails, and they needed someone to kind of build that out and manage it. And then throttled projects, which would be, like not failing, not unimportant projects, but for some reason, there's some kind of constraint on it where getting, time to market isn't the biggest consideration, or there's only this much budget available. And that's why it must have this thinner slice over a long period of time. So those are kind of categories that I look for. And it's easier to find those like by either looking in the Ruby on Rails link Slack or other forums, places where there are people that have probably more like legacy Rails apps. That's like at least one category. Maybe they haven't blown up, but they're making some money. So there's stuff that needs to be done. And that may be unappealing to a lot of people not getting to work on Greenfield. I haven't worked on a Greenfield app and it's been a while, other than my own side projects. It's been a while that I've worked on a contract Greenfield app. But honestly, I've come to really like legacy. I mean, everything's legacy after like 6 months.
Sure.
So
yeah.
Cleaning up other people's messes or improving existing systems to me is just about as fun as building new stuff.
It's a different challenge. There is a lot of fun to Greenfield because you're getting to figure out how to solve this problem, what the best architecture for something might be. But there's also a lot of fun and challenge in legacy, at least I've found, where you're trying to figure out how to improve the system without breaking everything. There's such a balance there, and that can be a lot of fun. Fun in air quotes. We might be a little weird when we think of fun. Like, the more challenging it is, the more fun it is.
One of the things I like about it is that apps that are old enough to kind of make it and to have enough cruft in them, or things that are like hairy and difficult to work with, it's because something about them was meaningful. They've continued to exist. So they're serving customers or the clients or whoever. Somebody's getting value out of this thing. And that's the place at which I feel like I start to learn, I understand more about what success is. Success isn't like building the perfect Greenfield app that no customers ever want to use. Success can be in apps that might be written quick and dirty that found a product market fit, and then you need to do a lot of cleanup. But it's at that point where you're starting to do a lot of cleanup that you learn most about maybe the domains that you're modeling, or how to build things well, or what things broke in the process of building things quickly. That's where I feel like I start to get my biggest learnings. And a lot of times it's not my mistakes. I might be coming in to deal with the repercussions of someone else's coding choices. And I'm getting to learn from their things and also kind of be hopefully blameless in that. I've managed apps long enough to have all the WTFs where I get blame and it's me, so I can kind of be blameless about any other project I'm coming into too, and not judge and the previous person that was on this file. But that's where I'm starting to learn the most too. Oh, this is what's problematic about this. This is how we can improve it. now I understand things better. Now I understand ways to architect things better, ways that, understand this domain better. All that kind of stuff is really enjoyable. Having those aha moments.
Yeah, I can completely agree with that. I very much enjoy getting to clean up messes, and you clean enough of them up, you start to discern patterns of like, okay, I understand why the decision was made the way it was. Not the right decision anymore, or it's not the right decision now, or maybe it wasn't the best decision. And instead of admitting that it wasn't the best decision, they just leaned fully into it. And now there's a bigger mess to clean up, but job security, right?
Yeah.
There's always something to clean up. So you mentioned in some of the strategies that work well for you is leaning really heavily into documentation and not just in the code, like a developer journal, taking notes. I just wanted to dive into that a little bit. What kind of app you're using for note taking? How are you structuring it? Is it a lot of freehand and then you just fuzzy find everything? Or do you have an organization system, and how did that grow?
I'm sort of always in process with my note taking tools or my personal information management. So I'm using an app called Notable. It's like a markdown editor, note taking system. It's maybe like a lightweight Obsidian, something like that. I found Obsidian to be too much of a tool for me. Like I like simple, pretty compact tools with sort of a point of view, I guess, not super configurable. I like having an app that has like a point of view, and Notable is fairly compact. It's not super customizable or configurable, but it's fairly simple and it's in Markdown, which I love. So what I'll have is like, I'll have a note for the week, and that keeps all of my to-dos for every day. I have a template note for my week, and I'll organize all of everything personally and work-wise that I have to do every day. I'll create new notes for each day. Any day I've got notes to take, I create one with a date stamp as a title, and then divide it up into sections depending on which client I'm working on or which problem I'm solving. If I talk to the auto mechanic or if I have to talk to my accountant about something, I'm writing notes about that stuff as well. Okay, so then if I have a project with a particular client, like I'm working on an issue or a new feature, I'll often create a new note just for that, where I'm keeping a lot of the details of the tasks that I'm like managing myself that maybe I don't want them to see in a PR or issue. I don't know. This is weird, but it might be weird. It might just be me, but there are times where I'd rather keep my own personal to-do list that isn't like exposed to a client about like, I did this and then I tried this and then I had this problem. And like, I just want them to see like sometimes a more simplified view of that. So I'll sometimes manage that in my notes, as well as sometimes if I get blocked. One of the things that's tough about working alone is, there's nobody for me to pair with. There's nobody for me to be like, hey, how do I solve this problem? Have you ever had to do this before? There's nobody to do that. So it's either Google or Think. One of the things I've done lately is just when I get stuck, I long form write. And that ends up helping a lot. Just brain dump the problem. So writing long form has been a helpful one for me. And then any kind of reference documentation that I find, whenever I have 15 tabs open, I'm copying all those URLs to save for later to come back to. And that helps a ton because there's so many times I've been like, there was this one article that was super helpful and I can't find it anymore. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's my approach right now. And search has been enough. And the number of notes I'm making, like I've been using this Notable app for 2 years and I've looked back at the total count on notes. It's basically a note a day is what it averages out to be. But it's been a huge help to me.
Again, sorry for folks who haven't seen the RubyConf mini videos yet. I swear I will link them all once they're out. But did you go to Aji's talk on Zen?
Yeah.
Do your notes ever grow like that, where you take notes on a particular set of steps and then you're like, oh, I've revisited this note a few times, so I'm going to kind of refine it and maybe make it a script or a more followable set of instructions?
I haven't gone to that extent, but that was definitely inspiring. I really like what he showed and really hadn't even considered doing it that way, but it was definitely inspiring. So part of what his approach was like, start with documentation that's runnable right away. And I like that, but that means being outside of my note-taking app, because then I've got files that are really Ruby files that are runnable. when I'm not sure I'm ready to like do that, like I want to start with Markdown first.
Well, didn't he do that? His strategy was because you don't know what's important, you take notes on everything, and then the notes you frequently go back to maybe become a Ruby, like you move the Markdown into a Ruby script. You run the Ruby script and it doesn't actually do anything. It just prompts you to do stuff.
Right. That makes sense. Honestly, I've not been good about writing my own automation tools. I do that occasionally, like my own little Ruby scripts to do stuff, but I have not been very good about that. So it was inspiring to see, and I would like to be better at that. I think maybe a lot of times I think I'm never going to do this again, or I hope I'm never going to do this again.
You need a counter at the bottom of the file, like times I have had to reference this. If that number hits 3, I'm automating some of this.
Exactly.
So what's some blockers that you either have or recently solved? What's a blocker look like for someone who's essentially a solo dev?
So one of the blockers I had recently for this client that has these really complex workflows, Sidekick workflows, basically customers will come in and enter keywords, and these reports will get created for them based on SEO keywords, search phrases, and that sort of thing. And these workflows they're all run through Sidekick jobs. It'll create one active record object, which will then run a job that will in-queue like a bunch of other jobs to do like 30 different API calls. And then the response from that comes back and gets stored in other active record objects. And then the data from those responses is then processed and then like pulled up into some other active record objects. And then that triggers more API jobs to run. So it's like a lot of, this thing triggers this thing, lots of API calls, lots of active record object creation, stuff like that. It can be challenging to follow all of that through the code. The one I was going to talk about, these workflows, they will take between 2 minutes and 10 minutes to run. So they're long running and clients are sort of waiting for them. A lot of times, if you're doing background jobs that are reports and stuff, it might be like nightly stuff that no one needs anytime soon. These ones they're not exactly time sensitive, but customers may be waiting for them to come back.
Okay.
And there's only so fast that they can go. There's a lot of things like I would maybe architecturally change about the way the app works right now. But without being able to do that, we're getting ready to expose an API, and I needed a way to control how many workflows can be triggered at any given time. So basically a concurrency for the workflows, but it's not like it's one Sidekick job. So it's not like limiting a certain number of jobs of a certain job type or something like that. There isn't one overarching job that controls everything. So what I did was I created like a scheduler. So instead of kicking off these workflows upon record creation, basically the first active record object would initially kick off the job that would produce this workflow that would last sometimes 10 minutes and then complete with an entire object graph connected to it with all this additional data that could be rolled up and then viewed as a report. So instead, I didn't have them kick off immediately, but created a scheduler. So I have this background job that runs periodically and looks at the currently running workflows that are out there, how many are in process right now. And then we have a max concurrency that just like an environment variable that I've set. And I say, okay, so there's 10 that haven't been completed and they're all firing a bunch of jobs, but we're saying our capacity in quotes is like 30. So that means there's 20 slots where we could start new workflows. So then what I'll do is I'll go find all the unstarted reports, these workflows, but we wanted a way to do it so that it would be fair across teams. If multiple teams had dumped in their requests, we don't want one team taking over. So when I started working on this, I couldn't find the name of the thing I wanted. It was like, okay, I want a way to say, take one from this team, one from this team, one from this team. Like a round robin is what I kept thinking of. Oh, this is like round robin. And no, it's not round robin. Turns out it's called fair queuing. You have requests for these reports from a number of teams. And I want to say, grab the first report from team 1, the first report from team 2, go through all the teams. So at least each team can get one in the door if you've got the capacity for it, but keep going around all the teams until you have reached the total available capacity for this, or until all the reports that haven't been started or have been queued up. And that ended up being a pretty easy thing to build. It didn't take that much. I hadn't seen anything like this. A lot of times I first instinct is to go do a bunch of research. Okay, I've never seen something like this. Who's done this before? Somebody's done this. I couldn't find anybody that had approached and queuing really large workflows like this before, but it was pretty simple. And then it also gives us a lot of control over, like, if we want to say, like, we need to do something on our server and we're not going to let any workflows through, we just drop the concurrency to 0 and then nothing can get scheduled at that point. Or if we realize our capacity is much higher, I can keep changing that number around. But that was like an interesting challenge that probably wouldn't recommend doing it this way to begin with. But because I couldn't change a lot of the nature of the way these workflows already were in the system, there just was not time to do that. Doing the scheduling approach allowed me to have a lot more operational control over the workflows that got triggered.
That's wild. That's a lot to manage and a lot to kind of wrap your head around to solve that problem, especially you reference like no one else had done it before. That's always a wild problem because at least when you have a problem, you're like, people have solved it and there's a number of different ways. You can kind of weigh all the different options by, I don't know, going halfway with each and seeing which one feels better or approaching architecture that way. But when you have something that no one else has run into and solved and you're just like flying by the seat of your pants trying to figure it out, that's especially when you're dealing with background jobs.
Yeah.
You're not even necessarily opening up a console and playing around with a bunch of objects. You're like, sidekick, cool. And hope it works. See what happens.
That kind of gets back to the thing I was saying before, which is like sometimes when you don't see other people doing the thing you're doing, could be because you really stumbled on something interesting. And sometimes it's because you're an idiot and you shouldn't be doing this in the first place. I think there are kind of rare use cases for this. I'm pretty sure this isn't stupid. Hopefully it's not. But it was kind of like, I had to pull the trigger too. It was kind of like, given the time constraints on this project and the fact that I could not do a lot of additional re-architecting, this was sort of the best thing I could do in the meantime. Right. A lot of the times it's just about trade-offs. Like, well, things are not the way I'd like them to be in this system, but I need to meet these objectives. And I may not even like the objectives, but that is what I'm getting paid for. And that is what I will do. So how do I do this in a way that meets this available time and these criteria that I can live with in a way that's going to be maintainable in the future? I think that's that, but it's challenging, especially working alone when you're like, oh man, who else can I run this by to see if I'm out of my mind on this? That's definitely a time where I'm extra cautious around that. And maybe that was part of the blocker, was really like, boy, I could do this, but is this a smart thing to do? Or is there a good reason why other people haven't done this? And that's the thing I'm looking at a lot because I don't, necessarily have other people to say, hey, bud, that's not a smart move. It's like,
yeah, that's an interesting challenge. Not having people to bounce ideas off of. Hey, can you sanity check me? Like, I'll do that at work frequently where I'm just like, hey, if someone could like look at this PR just as a sanity check, it's not done. Mm-hmm. Just before I go too deep down this rabbit hole, can someone just look at it and like make sure I'm not doing something silly? And there's at least more than a couple of times where someone's like, you can just do this. I'm like, oh my God, you just saved me like 10 hours. That's borderline scary, the thought of not having anyone to bounce ideas off of.
It's just like how I grew up doing this. I still connect very well to my, 16-year-old self learning how to build websites in my bedroom or something. So I lived in the middle of Ohio in corn country and my friends were farmers and nobody I knew liked building websites or even really knew what those were at the time. So it's always felt that way for me. Like I've worked alone so much, just keep banging your head on stuff, but also read and research like crazy. And then learn from your dumb mistakes. And hopefully they're not too dumb. And hopefully the mistakes aren't too bad. That's part of it too, is when you're working on smaller projects, the scale and scope of your failures is usually, smaller. That's a helpful part of it. I need to do probably a better job of being involved in forums to ask questions. But you know what? Like that's one of the areas where in the past, I lurk a lot. Like, for example, on the Nate Berkopek's Slack group, I think it's called Rails Performance Slack group. I love lurking in there because people post like really interesting architectural challenges or performance challenges. And I learn a lot there. But in the times where I have posted something in various forums, often it'll just be crickets. And that's always been a challenge. Like, So when I take the time to actually try to explain it, like someone else doesn't have enough context to know, like you want them to like be totally into the problem space that you're in. And if it's not easy to grok, they're just going to kind of skip that comment.
Right.
Or that thread. So that's not worked very well for me. But I think maybe another part of that is because I'm lurking, I haven't like done a lot of my own giving advice to other people. I think people like to give advice to people that they know and they have some kind of connection to. And if you just keep dropping your questions in, it's like, you're not really part of this community. You're just asking stuff. I think that's another thing I need to get better at. But that's also, again, more investment of time. So yeah, it's a weird problem.
Yeah.
I haven't totally solved that.
Have you ever tried the approach of saying this is the way to do it and intentionally being wrong and just waiting for the internet to come and correct you as a way to get your answer?
I guess I'm like hoping that this is what this will be for this podcast. Like when somebody hears what I describe, if they understood what I was trying to say, they'll say, oh my gosh, this guy's an idiot. And let me tell you what he should have done. And then I'll learn and go fix it. I'll have a new PR fresh for my client next week.
There you go. Yeah. So if anybody is like a background job sidekick whiz and was able to follow the full workflow of what was going on, make sure you reach out to Jeremy and let him know how best to solve it, or just say, you're doing great. Sometimes you just need to hear that. Any other interesting blockers to discuss, even if it's not code related, even business oriented blockers?
Yeah. So one of the big business blockers for me right now is I mentioned that at the beginning of the year that I tried to make a conscious effort to get better at Twitter. I even took this course, Danny Vassallo. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he sold this like info product on building a Twitter audience, which like partly makes my skin crawl because I don't want to be that kind of person necessarily. Like, oh, I'm trying to build an audience. Past me would have thought that's really fake and I wouldn't want to do that. Where I'm at now is like, no, I like being involved in the world. I like making friends. I like talking about Ruby and Rails. I like solving technical problems and I want to connect to people that need my services. And none of that is fake or weird. But I like took this course to like try to understand like, how do I use Twitter in a better way? How do I connect to people better? So this course is called Everyone Can Build a Twitter Audience. I think it was maybe like one video. I can't remember. But he laid out like how to use Twitter and build an audience in a way that was like much better explanation than I'd ever seen of how to use Twitter in a way to build an audience and connect to people. And I started to do some of the things that he suggested there, and it changed my thinking and really helped me with engagement. I hate saying that stuff, but it helps. I'm hopefully making some friends and connecting to people and talking about stuff I like. And it really works. So I feel like I was starting to get Twitter right. And then Elon Musk buys Twitter and all my Ruby friends moved to Mastodon. And it's like, what the heck, man? Like, what do I do now?
I was going to ask how you felt about the current state of Twitter, given that you've put a fair amount of work into it.
Exactly. One of my blockers is, okay, if I'm using Twitter as one of my sources of connection to my community, but also lead generation, it's part of my business. What do I do now? And do I try to move to Ruby.social, to Mastodon there and continue my Ruby and Rails conversations there? Do I stay on Twitter? Do I move to other areas? It's interesting because it feels like each platform has its own approach. You almost need like a different approach. It's each one. And I feel like I was just starting to understand Twitter a little bit, that it's taken a little bit of the wind out of my sails, maybe. I have not been very consistent like in the past month or two, primarily because I was working on my talk for RailsConf Mini for so long. And it's just like, I can't have that many open tabs on my brain. But I was hoping to jump back in and I was like, crap, like what am I going to do now? Like I could get over onto Ruby.social, start posting there and get a little feel for what this is like and how it works. But if I want to connect to people that might need work, a lot of them may not be all the cool people over on Ruby Social. Because a lot of those people are big time Ruby and Rails folks who work on big teams. A lot of times they're not going to be adjacent to my clients. And I'm guessing the people that might be potential clients for me are probably going to be more like on Twitter still. So it might be that like a lot of those people that have said, I'm done, I'm out of here, I'm not supporting this guy anymore. maybe that leaves a vacuum where there's still room for more Ruby and Rails content now because people have left, the people that were providing a lot of those conversations.
Yeah.
But then there's also a part of me that's like, well, do I want to support this? Do I like how this is going? And Twitter for me has been a good thing, but that's easy for me to say. I haven't been at the wrong end of the stick on it. And I want to be in communities that are supportive and helpful and, encouraging and good for all people. And, that's another thing. It's just kind of a blocker philosophically or however you want to look at that. I'm trying to figure that out. And then if not those, then what else? Because I do need some way to do this. It's kind of hitting a few things for me, which is like connecting to people that do the kind of work I do and like these kinds of things. I need to learn on my own and grow, but I also need to connect to future clients. I guess for this one, I don't have an answer yet. What's the answer to this blocker? I guess I'm contemplating it and trying to figure out where do I invest my energy this coming year.
Yeah. I at least understand some of that problem. I'm not necessarily trying to find business with my social media presence, but I am trying to get more people to listen to the podcast, or at least let people who might enjoy the show and listening to guests like you and what you have to say, making sure that enough people have access to it. So I've dabbled with not just posting on Twitter, but also posting in Reddit and posting on LinkedIn. And it's very weird the way you get feedback and the way that social media apps in general calculate who has seen it and why it made it to this part and why the algorithm picked it up or didn't pick it up. And I'm just like, I just want to let people know there's a podcast episode out. I don't want to have to do all this complex hoop jumping. I don't have an answer for you. I feel like just figuring out Twitter and now everyone's leaving. Not everyone. It's definitely an oversimplification of it. There's a lot of cross posting going on. There's a lot of people straddling both Twitter and Mastodon. Like I'm focusing just on those two because this is where I was most active in Twitter. And it seems like the people who are leaving Twitter or who are doing Twitter and are now doing Twitter and Mastodon. But I didn't even realize until I started posting the episodes, I did not realize how much was actually going on in Reddit. So I need to get better at Reddit. And it's like, oh, okay, that's a whole nother thing. And I occasionally post on LinkedIn, and I use LinkedIn when I'm job hunting normally. So it was a little weird to start posting there.
Yeah, you scare your employer when you do that.
Right. I know the first time I posted anything there, I got like 4 people liked it. But then the next episode was the one with Ernesto and his company, both Umbu and Fast Ruby, Umbu Labs and Fast Ruby IO, posted about my post. And that got me like, oh my God, through the stratosphere. And then the next episode kind of was back to if the person isn't on LinkedIn doing self-promotion with the episode, it's not even worth spending too much time on there. So it's like LinkedIn's a weird one, but if it's the right episode, it's good. So you want to be consistent.
That's an interesting takeaway, which is like when you have a guest that is active in a medium that you aren't, that can be advantageous for you to like promote for that time. That's kind of interesting.
I'm figuring a lot out. I think I had talked about it a little bit at the podcast panel, which that episode will be out before this one airs. But I talked a little bit about like, there's just a lot to figure out with podcasts. I'm still trying to keep it a little bit more of it's fun. It's a good excuse to just be like, hey, Jeremy, you want to hop on an hour-long Zoom and like just talk about shit in a slightly organized way? I'm trying to keep it that way. But at the same time, I'd love to hire an editor. I'd love to do more than one episode a month. I'd love to do things with it that require an audience, because an audience will yield me a sponsor who will pay for the editing. So it's still just a fun hobby and not something that is hitting my bank account for more than a couple of bucks posting or whatever. So it's like that weird, I want it to be chill and fun, but also I sort of need the audience to make better content. It's a weird position. I ended up with the podcast because I'm not a good blog writer, as hard as I tried. I've had a few decent ones, but I'm not a great writer. I'm a little bit too much of a perfectionist to actually release anything I write with any kind of regular cadence. But a podcast is a little different, right? You have a date that it goes out. You recorded with a guest. They're anxiously awaiting their episode to go out. So it's like a little bit more motivation to get it done. I like the podcast medium. So now I just need to like ease my way into the deep end of it of growing the audience. So I'm sort of in the same boat as you where I'm still trying to figure out how the heck do I do things. I will say for Twitter, do you use a tool called Black Magic or have heard of it?
No.
Should check it out. It basically taps into Twitter's API. Tony, I am going to butcher his last name if I try it. The developers put a lot of time and effort into it, and he's made a really cool product that I am still learning how to use, but it just gives you a ton of metrics for how and when people interact with your tweet. And then like you're able to go back and see which tweets quote unquote performed well and then give you some insight into why. And that's how I like, okay, I'm going to release my podcast episodes at 8 a.m. because I get the most engagement between 8:30 and 9. But if I post at 9, I lose X amount of percentage. So if I post at 8, I actually grow this much more. And it was like, I would have never figured that shit out on my own. I'm not that smart. But having this tool was like, hey, you can do this. And I'm in the same boat as you. I'm like, I don't want to be the guy like, smash the like button, please follow. But at the same time, hey, I'd love this podcast. And more than the podcast, I'd love the guests to have a really good platform to be able to talk about what they want to talk about and be reasonably confident that it's reaching a lot of listeners. And it's weird because like when I first started, I'd have like 30 people listen to an episode in like a 7-day span of time. And I was like, that's awesome. 30 people. I don't even know 30 people and they're listening to something I threw out. And now it's like I get 600 to 800 people in a 7-week period of time listening to the show.
Oh, that's rad.
That's a lot of people, but I don't have to see them. I don't have to talk to them. Like that RubyConf, I was like kicking in my mouth a little bit when I look out and I'm like, there's like 150 people in the room staring at me. This is terrifying. I'll stick to the podcasting where I know they're listening. I just don't have to like actively see them.
No, that's very cool. I'll check that out. That looks like a cool tool. I've definitely gotten into some of the analytic stuff. It's actually kind of fun to talk to my teenagers about because I think it's one of the few things that I do that they are sort of interested in.
There you go. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
no, absolutely.
Which is kind of funny. It's not like they are trying to have any social media following themselves, but they're definitely cued into that kind of culture. Yeah, it's like an interesting thing to talk to them about.
So, but that does kind of bring us to close to time. Podcasts are supposed to be a certain time. More things I'm learning. But I wanted to give you as much time to either revisit anything that you've talked about and wanted to dive deeper in. If you want to add more blockers, go for it. But also give you the opportunity to share something cool or interesting or new that you've played with, built, learned, anything to kind of round out the episode.
One thing I'm trying to figure out right now is I had such a great time at these conferences this year, and maybe especially at the smaller ones. I've got this like feeling like I want to do this.
Yeah.
I want to do this myself.
Do it.
So I have many spreadsheets right now that I'm working on. I am very close to pulling the trigger on Blue Ridge Ruby next year. And I want to do it in Asheville, North Carolina, my favorite spot in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I lived there several years ago for like a year and a half with my family. And I love Asheville. Asheville's like, they call it like a Portland of the East. It's got a great food scene, great beer scene, great music. It's like an hour north of here. So I go there regularly to see shows and it's right in the mountains. So tons of hiking, kayaking, all kinds of stuff like all around. So I would love to do a small regional Ruby conference there next June, I think is what I'm looking at. So
let's go. I'm pumped. It's interesting that you brought up Asheville. I was actually sort of just in Asheville.
Oh, I saw a picture. You were like were you like in the Smokies or something?
Yeah, I was in the Great Smoky Mountains. I was just outside of, I guess, Pigeon Forge in Gatlinburg in Tennessee, but we went to some peak. It has an observation tower and it gets you the highest in the area. And to get there, to get to the part that you hike, we were driving and my GPS kept going like, welcome to North Carolina, welcome to Tennessee, welcome to North Carolina. Right. And it said like, there was a few trailheads that were like, the address was Asheville, North Carolina. And I was like,
nice.
So as soon as you said it, I'm like, wait, why do I know that? And I just pulled it up on maps. It's like, that's why I know it because it's super close to where I just was.
There's so much to do there. It's the kind of place where if you go there, you're going to want to move there. It's great. I'm not sure why I left. So I would love to do it there. I'm have a call with a venue tomorrow That's one of the next big things. So like figuring out, okay, so if I knew that I could get 100 people to attend a conference and that I could break even without losing my mind, I would do this. That's the thing. That's what I need to do. Or even close to 100. If it was like over 75 and I break even, I think I need to be around that to break even. But the big thing is like, I need to find a venue that's going to work. And I don't want a crappy venue. I want a cool venue, which means money. So I'm going to talk to my top pick tomorrow and hopefully go on a tour of it next week. I've already been there. I've seen like a show there. I really like it. It's this Masonic temple, which seems weird, but it's a very cool venue with a really sweet theater. And if not that, there's like a bunch of other options that are interesting. So I know that's going to be my big cost is like the venues, that and like speakers. I want to make sure it covers speakers as well as I can. So those are my big, hard kind of fixed costs. If I can keep venue costs under control, then I think I could control all the other aspects or enough of the other aspects that I feel comfortable or mostly comfortable.
I think a little bit of an advantage you have is that you've been to 4 conferences this year. I didn't mention this in the beginning, but I've been to the same 4 conferences as you. Every conference I've been to that was in person, you were there. And I think what I learned, if I was going to do it, obviously you're not going to model it after RailsConf in Portland because that's a completely different beast.
Yeah.
Maybe not even model it after RubyConf Mini. There are some good takeaways there, but that was still kind of
still bigger than I could handle.
Ruby Central supported. Mm-hmm. But between Rails SAS and Sin City Ruby, I think there was a lot of learning about what it would take. I know Jason's was really small, but he really only promoted it through his Twitter following. But he still had, I think, a decent turnout. I mean, I think it was great. You wanted more than what he had, but I think if I'm remembering correctly, he said one of the things that he did to keep costs down was like, everyone's on their own for lunch. No, I'm sorry. That was Rails SAS, wasn't it? Jason did have basic, but he's like, that's what I should have done was everyone's on their own for lunch. So especially if Asheville has cool breweries and like, if it's in an area that, like cool, it's the first iteration, like you're on your own for lunch, enjoy. It can also help keep ticket prices down, which I know is a consideration for people. I know people who really wanted to go to RubyConf Mini and were just like, I don't have a job that's going to pay me to go, so I can't go. Yeah. But there were plenty of people who went to the other ones because it was a much cheaper ticket.
That's what I'm figuring out right now. And hopefully in the next couple of weeks, I will decide whether I'm actually going to try to pull this off next year or not.
I hope you do, because I am one of those people who are hard in the camp of like more regional conferences, please. Like not just, hey, I'd love to not have to leave my time zone to go to a conference, but like it's just the smaller venue, you get to hang out with people, have more meaningful conversations. There's a lot less. I am completely evisceratedly tired after a big conference. It's like, there's just so many people. My social battery drains on day one. And then I'm just like powering through on pure adrenaline. And like, I don't get to see these people often enough. So like the smaller venues are great, the smaller conferences. And then, I mean, if you do it, and then someone else goes, you know what? He did it and he didn't have a background in it and wasn't
he wasn't anybody.
Andrew Culver, then I can do it too. And like, then we'll have another one and another one. And then we'll get to the point where it's like every month there's a conference to go to and that'll be great. There'll be so much less pressure and that'll be so good for people coming into the community to see that there's a lot going on. There's something in their area. They don't have to fly across the country to meet up with other devs. There's something in their city, town area. So I think it's important to do it. I'm super pumped. Just the thought of like getting to go to another conference. I'm already excited. I'm fully recovered from RubyConf Mini. Let's go. Yeah, Nashville is awesome.
That is like one of the things I've been thinking is like, what is something that I can do for the Ruby and Rails community? Like I want to do something that would be helpful. So like, I definitely feel like there's more room for this and definitely want to make it easy for newcomers or people that have been maybe conference averse in the past. Too big, too overwhelming. I've definitely felt that at conferences in the past. Like I was afraid that if I went, I wouldn't find anybody to go to dinner with. I'd be so mad at myself. I'd feel like I was in high school again. What's interesting is out of all 4 of those conferences, the smaller ones were the ones where I made friends the fastest. In particular, Sin City.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how, was it like 40, 45 people, something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
I met most of them, and it was the easiest one to make new friends.
Yeah.
And for me, that's maybe like a bigger thing than the learnings that I have from talks. I want to be inspired and learn stuff in a talk, but I want to make friends. I want to meet people and, have interesting conversations. And it was easiest at that smaller scale, way easier than RailsConf. RailsConf was awesome because of its scale, but it was difficult to make new friends. Thankfully, I had already met people at Sin City before going there, or it would have been even harder to talk to people. If that had been my one conference experience this year, it would have been so intimidating. And I probably would have felt like conferences are a lot of money and maybe not worth all the effort, because I would not have made very many friends. It was just the fact that I had already been making friends at Sin City that got me like ready for a bigger conference. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think that is excellent advice and something that I have definitely figured out this year. Like, I was so pumped to go back in person. And I think my first one was RubyConf in Denver, was my first one back since the pandemic. And I just like walked into it going, oh, wow, I forgot I don't know how to socialize. And this is super intimidating. And like, it's not that people are cliquey. Everybody in the Ruby community is awesome. You could sit down at anyone's table and they're going to be like, hey, what's going on? Who are you? Like, what are you working on? You're going to make at least acquaintances, right?
Yeah.
Like, no one's going to be like, you're not part of our group. But there are groups. There are people who already know each other and you're like, I don't want to awkwardly stand here. So unless you go in with friends already, those big ones are tough to make new friends at.
Because you're like, okay, there's a group of like 10 people over there. Are those all like GitHub employees? Or are those just people like just hanging out? And especially when people are in masks, you go through the hallway, this huge hallway, all these people milling about. And the people that are standing around talking, it's really hard. It's harder than just normal to break in because of those two things. Are those all people that know each other or are having a private conversation? And like, I can't see their faces to even know like, see any like cues that it might be acceptable for me to come in and like stand here and try to strike up a conversation with some of them. And that was just like so challenging.
I'm with you. It's one of the things that I really appreciated about Sin City Ruby and Rails SaaS was because it was so much smaller. It was so much easier to meet everybody, talk to everybody, make meaningful connections. I'm excited to go to RailsConf this upcoming year because there is something awesome about the scale. The scale, there's that the expo hall, you're talking to all these other companies and like, I'm not job hunting, but I'm always talking to them like, hey, how do you guys do recruiting? How do you guys internally do this? So I can take it back to mine. I'm definitely not telling anyone don't go to RailsConf. There is a lot of fun to be had, but if I had to only pick one, I'd probably stick with the smaller ones. I enjoy the talks. I enjoy going and learning something new, but it's always about the people. It's the hallway track was the number one. I will happily skip a talk to hang out with someone and get to know them better.
I have such a hard time doing that. I'm such a rule follower. I have to go to all the talks and I want to like make sure that speakers have people. I know everyone says hallway track. I have not figured out how to do that yet.
There's no figuring it out. It just happens. Like, I think my first real experience with it, I did a little bit in past conferences pre-COVID, but at RubyConf in Denver, I was on my way to a talk that I was super excited about, but I saw Justin Searles. It was the first time meeting him in person. So I just went up and I was like, hey, I just want to thank you for like the stuff that you put out and like the blog posts and just being hilarious and everything. And we ended up talking for like 45 minutes.
Oh, right.
I was like, well, I missed that talk, but that was worth it. And I was like, oh, is this the hallway track? Is that what the hallway track is? You just talk to someone? Yeah. So that was me figuring out the hallway track was just like, oh, you just accidentally missed talk. This might take the winner for like share something new and interesting. This is exciting. I'm very excited about this. I have been bothering Jason Charnes to put back on Southeast Ruby and he's very much on the fence. And so I'm like, always like, there's going to be a new regional. And now you just essentially just announced one. So pumped and definitely we'll have you back on once it's officially announced to do nothing but talk about how awesome it's going to be.
Oh, we could even talk about all the stuff. I'm like, there's so many logistics to figure out.
Yeah.
even that is like, whoa, this is really eye-opening. I wish someone would talk about this.
Right. And I think I mentioned on Twitter or Mastodon, wherever I posted, like, please document this process, because that's the other thing preventing people is like, I don't even know how to start even planning it. So like anything that you learn, anything that's like a non-obvious takeaway, definitely document. And I would love to have you back on to talk about all of it, the conference that's going to happen, the things that you've been learning and all that. But in the meantime, so that we can generate more of a following and people who want to follow up and are getting excited for it, where can people find you on the interwebs?
I am still on Twitter. I'm still committed to Twitter, so don't hear me say I'm leaving. But my handle is Jeremy Smith Co. That's usually my handle just about anywhere. But I'm also on Ruby.social under the same handle. And whenever I get to a decision here, and probably even before that, I will be talking more about Blue Ridge Ruby.
It's going to be awesome. I am pumped. I mean, it's very exciting. So awesome, man. Well, thank you for coming on the show and sharing all of your experiences and dropping all of the cool information about Blue Ridge Ruby. Super excited about that. I will have all of the ways to contact you, including the website for your solo studio. Is that what we call it? The studio?
Yeah, I like the studio term. Yeah, studio, web studio. Yeah.
We'll include that for anyone who's interested in your work. And yeah, we'll definitely have you back on for the Blue Ridge Ruby stuff. Thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks, Drew. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.